So David, thank you so much for coming.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'm not going to give you a huge introduction because everybody already knows who you are. You're very famous.
Well,
So we're going to hear something about your research on Singapore English, and I, for one, cannot wait.
Okay.
Talk to you afterwards. Bye.
Bye. Let me. So I'll be talking on research on Singapore English. I'm just going to give you an overview of some issues about research on Singapore English, ways of modeling Singapore English, and indeed all Englishes, data that can be used for describing Singapore English, corpora that are used, and just bring it up to date with a couple of recent approaches to give you some ideas. So this will be a survey of what we have done on Singapore English and how we have done it. We start with models that have been used. Look at three different approaches. Look at lectal approaches. Look at Klein's variation and diglossia. So we start with the lectal approach, which looks at an acrolect, describes usage in terms of an acrolect, a mesolect, and a basilect. This is how Tung did it, Tung 1979. He described educated English and less educated English and more colloquial English on that basis, depending on how well educated the speaker was. That's fine because it gives you a range of varieties, but it's rather static. Speakers are one of those categories, and it doesn't reflect the fact that people change in the way that they speak. There's fluidity in the way that they use language. People switch between the acrolect and the basilect. They're not just one category, they switch. So now let's look at how we can model that, how we can model switching. And look at Paquier 1991, and Paquier talked about variation in terms of Klein's of variation. You have two different Klein's. You have formality and proficiency. So people can be formal, more or less formal, and they can be proficient or less proficient. And in following these Klein's of variation, they can move between standard Singapore English and colloquial English, Singapore colloquial English, which is sometimes known as Singlish. This is how she modeled it using these Klein's. You can see the formality Klein on the left and the proficiency Klein on the right. And as people change according to those Klein's, they shift between standard Singapore English and Singapore colloquial English. Okay, that's Klein's proficiency from Paquier. A different approach, but similar in some ways, but an alternative approach is that of diglossia, where you can switch between the high variety, which is educated Singapore English, and the low variety, which is colloquial Singapore English or Singlish. This approach was followed by Anthea Gupta, who published her book in 1993, The Step Tongue. Incidentally, all of the references are at the end, so I hope you have access to those so you can trace these if you want. I've given you the books, but the full references are at the end. One distinct aspect, one distinct characteristic of diglossia is that not all speakers have access to the high variety. Everybody can switch to the low variety, but not everybody has a high variety because not everybody is well educated. Now, if we look at the data that she used, she was actually modeling the way that children develop skills in Singapore English. She was looking at very young children, and she recorded 9 hours in 2 different families, the boys' family and the girls' family. So it's quite a substantial amount of data, but it's only from 4 speakers, and obviously only 2 of them are really speaking very much. So she's modeling how children develop ability at diglossic skills in using language, particularly how they switched when talking to her, when they will use a more formal variety, slightly more formal, how emergent diglossia can be described. So that's diglossia, and we looked at a few models there. I now want to move on to look at the more about the corpora, the data that's used in describing the language. And we'll look at a number of sources of data. First, I'll start with ICE, which is an incredible resource because you have 1 million words in a number of different varieties. I forget, there may be about 20 varieties now, from Britain, Canada, Australia, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Fiji, Ghana, or many others, and Singapore. There was a component in Singapore. The value of this is that each component is tightly controlled, so there's the same amount of data in each genre. So, for example, some of it is formal, some of it is informal, some is written, some is spoken, some is public, some is private. But the exact quantities in each genre, each context is controlled, which allows a lot of very valuable comparison between these varieties to see how these different places use language. And that's a really powerful comparison. Now, I don't know if it's available online. You used to be able to write and get hold of the different varieties, the different contributions on a CD. I honestly don't know what's happened now, whether that's available. It's for Singapore, you could get it from NUS. I honestly haven't tried to see whether that's possible now. Okay, I want to look at some others, and now we'll look at Lisa Lim, who I believe is giving you a presentation, or maybe has given a presentation to. She did some work on Singapore English. This is an edited book. She wrote one chapter, and the data for this, or much of the data for this, is based on another corpus, which is the GSSEC, which is the Grammar of Spoken Singapore English corpus. This is quite interesting because it's all quite informal. So the students walked around with a portable audio recorder, and they recorded themselves, 13 students, they recorded themselves talking to friends over dinner in shopping centers and things like that. So it's quite an informal collection of data, and it's quite, it's very powerful, the data analysis you can get from that based on quite informal recordings. But obviously there isn't much variation there because you won't have too many formal situations. But as a collection of spoken informal data, that's very valuable. Unfortunately, I don't believe it's available to everybody. I don't think they made that available. So I've never had access to that. Still, it's a very powerful corpus that provided some valuable analysis. Now, this is some work I did with my colleagues, Adam Brown and Lo E. Ling in Singapore. We collected a corpus of data by recording students at NIE in Singapore. I'll give you the details of the corpus in a moment, but the book that we published on that had 8 contributions from various people, from many from Singapore, but also from United States, America, Australia, so UK, United States, Australia, Germany, Japan, and Taiwan. And they were all required to make use of the corpus. So we have many different research papers based on the same data, which I thought was quite a powerful way of doing it. We also made the corpus available on CD. I believe it's still available online, so you can access that. The book was only about pronunciation, and indeed the corpus is really designed, well, it can be used for other things as well. The corpus involved 46 speakers. They were all, most of them were trainee teachers at NIE, not all, a few were former students and one or two others, but most were trainee teachers. So they had a good level of good standard of English. Most were Chinese, just a few Malays and Indians, because that's what we had available. And the data was all an interview with a British male academic, me actually. And they all began with the same question: what did you do during the last vacation? Now, obviously, there's not a lot of stylistic variation there because it's fairly formal. They're talking to me for an expat, and I was a lecturer of most of them. So they're talking to the academic lecturer, but it is conversational English and it is quite valuable. And we did a lot of research on not just pronunciation, but also on grammar and things like that. I'll give you a taste of this. I hope you can hear this. My voice, I'm the interviewer. The S is the student. You'll hear the S is a little louder, so which is as it should be. Okay, can I ask you, what did you do during your last vacation?
I spent a lot of time with my niece. I play with them. I read story to them. I enjoy myself. That? Yeah.
What sort of stories do you read?
Children's story. I have forgotten the title.
How old are your nieces?
3. She's 3 years old.
3 years old, right? Is it your brother's child or your sister's child?
My sister.
Okay, what's quite interesting in that is that you can look at the pronunciation and things, but one thing that's quite interesting from a grammatical point of view, or pronunciation, if you'd like as well, is that as I was talking to her, I wasn't certain how many nieces there were. First of all, I thought there was one, and then I thought there were more than one. So she seems to niece, so she's using singular, but it turned out that actually she's got more than one niece. So it gives you some insights into the grammar as well as the pronunciation. So that's a corpus that we made available and has been used quite widely for description of Singapore English. But it's limited in many ways because it's only a single context, which is an interview with me. One thing that we have done more recently, I believe that Sabrina will be talking to you soon, and she will be talking about a Brunei corpus. And what we did there was not just an interview, but we had a read passage as well. Now, the value of a read passage is it gives you the same data for each speaker, each participant, and that allows a comparison of how people say specific words. We didn't do that in the NIE corpus, but I did record a few Singaporeans. I mean, this is the passage that we use, the wolf passage. This is not from the corpus, this is another Singaporean though.
There was once a poor shepherd boy who watched his flocks in the fields next to a dark forest near the foot of a mountain.
Actually, it's like we used to watch. I wonder what maybe he was reading an earlier version of it. I don't know. This passage is deliberately designed to enable you to describe all of the sounds of English. Quite deliberately, we have a number of things. We have the j sound, as in usual, and pleasure, which is a rare sound. You won't get that in many, if you have ordinary interviews, you may find that you have that sound doesn't exist in the recording, your data. You also have minimal pairs. You have a duck and dark. You have feast and fist. So we have many like that, and we have, I think there is 5 or 6 minimal pairs in there. A dark is in line 3, and duck is near the middle. Feast at the end and fist at the beginning. So you can compare those sounds if that's important. Okay, the advantages of reading a passage is the same material is available from each participant. This facilitates comparison. All consonants, vowels can be included. We designed the passage carefully to include sounds like je, as in usual, and in oi, as obviously in oi, boy. So all the sounds of English are there, which is valuable. Disadvantages, well, it's quite a formal variety. It doesn't really represent how people speak in conversational contexts. Only phonology can be studied because you won't find out much about syntax or lexis, and you won't find out much about questions either. So it's limited, but it is a very powerful way of generating data that can be used in research. Now we move on to some work I did in 2007. This is an overview of Singapore English published by Edinburgh. And here, I did something which is a bit surprising, maybe. I used just a single speaker. Now that's obviously very limited because you don't know how typical that speaker is, but I found that was quite a powerful way of illustrating Singapore English, not really doing new research on Singapore English, but illustrating how one speaker speaks. And you can then find out quite a lot of variation in within a speaker, not, as we say, intra-speaker, not inter-speaker. Now, in this case, I didn't do the interviewing. Her friend was interviewing her. So it's a bit formal because it's still an interview, but at least it's with her friend rather than with me. So, and the data is fantastic. It's, listen to this. Listen to how also even within this short extract, she varies in the way that she pronounces the dental fricative, the s. She alternates between s and t. Listen.
Okay, so what did you do last weekend?
Last weekend, I did quite a few things during the weekends. Firstly, I went back to the primary school that I taught for the past 3 weeks to settle some things with the teachers there, and to finish up marking also. After that, I came back to NIE to do some library research till about 3:30, yeah. Then later on in the evening, went to the UK Fun Fair at Jurong East. It was interesting, but very expensive. The entrance fee is cheap. It's only $2. I guess that's cheap enough. But then
okay, very interesting. It's fantastic data. Even it's just one speaker. But if you heard, you may notice that she alternates between 3:30 and 3:30. So even in that short extract, she has variation. And she speaks exceptionally well, but sounds very Singaporean, which is exactly what we wanted. So that's good, but it is one speaker and you don't get much.
Sorry to interrupt you, David, but you've only got 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll be finished in 5 minutes. That's good.
Brilliant.
Okay, just to extract from her, La is from Singapore English.
a lot of things to do lah. So didn't really enjoy the 3 weeks there.
And
Japan is okay lah. The countryside is nice.
so you can hear La, very, very typical Singapore English. Okay, we finish off with recent approaches and then I'll stop there just to bring you up to date with some more recent things. This is a book, Leimgruber. He's looking particularly at the use of various features such as la, a, me, and he has 12 speakers for Chinese, for Malays, for Indians, basically in a diglossic approach, but quite valuable data, all from Polytechnic students. More recently, this is about 2015. What's interesting about this is that he does have access to some data, like from the ICE corpus. But one of the things that he does, which I think is important, is that he actually involves introspection and finding out in questionnaires to find out whether people accept certain sentences. The value of that is you can test what does not occur. If you look at corpus, you only have what does occur, and you might have things that they could occur, but they don't. But if you do introspection, you can give people sentences and say, is that acceptable or not? And that actually is quite a powerful way of getting data. He compared to Chinese, is looking at the use of ever, and he believes that it's influenced very heavily by Mandarin or 吃过日本饭. So 吃过 is aspect particle, and he says that Singapore English is influenced. And finally, we look at just a recent suggestion by Edgar Schneider, looking at complex dynamic systems based on chaos theory. It's been used mainly for first and second language acquisition, but it can be used for describing the evolution of varieties of English. And Edgar Schneider has just recently published some work on that and some suggestions. And this offers a very exciting way to investigate Singapore English and indeed other Englishes. Okay, the references are there. I hope you have access to the, if you need to trace up any of those, you can find them. I believe they're all there. That's about my time. Okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, David.
Okay. Well,
so we have time for some questions, because what we're going to do is we'll probably run over a little bit into the coffee break because of all the messing around at the beginning in terms of the IT. So do please feel free to have some time for questions. So I can't wait to get in there.
Hello, David. This is Lu Wen from US.
okay.
Thank you for the interesting seminar. Very informative. I have a question about the data you collected. One is for the 5 minutes interview, and you asked for. I feel like it's more controlled data collection, and as compared with another one, which is I just based on my opinion, it's more like a free flow. It's 1 hour. I'm just wondering if you can explain a bit what's the pros and cons between the controlled interview and free flow speech.
I think if you have uncontrolled speech, it's brilliant, but and you can get some speakers to speak much more casually and things like that. Sure, that's a different way of generating data. If you are familiar with the work of William Labov, he collects data in various ways, and instead of the kind of formal interview that I'm doing, he tries to generate informal data, and he always asks people if they've had any life-threatening experiences, because when they talk about that, they tend to forget they're being recorded and get quite emotional. So you can get some quite casual speech and things like that. Yeah, it's much more difficult collecting informal data, but if you can collect it, that's incredibly valuable. And in reality, we should try to collect a whole range of data. What I had in the formal interviews, it's a source of data. Fine, you can do something on that, but you're not really collecting data on casual situations or informal interactions. And that's incredibly important. And hopefully in the future, we will be doing a lot more of that. My hope is that as corpora of data become more available, we can do a lot of work, a lot of sophisticated work on that data based on, we don't all need to go out and collect fresh data. We should have access to corpora of data. The interesting thing is that although it's getting easier to share data using corpora, which is great, it's actually getting harder to get data from recordings, because you nowadays need to have all kinds of ethics approval and all sorts of stuff. When we did those, we didn't have those requirements, so it was a lot easier for us. I could just record people. But yeah, we should have a greater variation in style, indeed.
One question from the audience.
We have a question. Do you mean from the virtual audience?
Yes, from the virtual audience.
Okay, we have a question from the virtual audience, David. So you're going to handle that, are you, Sonia?
Yes, I unmuted Alfred, who's in our audience. It's raised his hand.
Okay, I can't hear you too clearly. So one possibility is to, if I can't hear it, you could put it into the chat so I could read it. That's possible.
Is that mine, Alfred?
Okay, that's better. Okay,
okay. Yes, this is Alfred from Nairobi, Kenya. So I have a question about the lector approach, where you distinguish between acrolect, that's educated speech, mesolect, and baselect, which you call colloquial. So I wonder how useful it is in studying. I studied Kenyan English, which developed as a second language variety. I wonder how useful this approach would be, because if you, for instance, if you say acrolect is educated and baselect colloquial, what's mesolect? What's in between? And beyond that, I have tried to pay attention to how people speak or write here in Kenya, and hardly can I find evidence of people who have two pronunciations or two ways of writing. In your data towards the end of your presentation, you told your presentation, actually, there's evidence that the speaker had two ways of pronouncing 330, I think. Is that would that be an example of baselect versus acrolect? But that then the issue would arise. That was, she produced the two pronunciations in the same type of interview. So really, I wonder how useful it is you have found that approach.
Okay, I think the lectal approach is limited. It's valuable to look at the education of the speaker, because obviously that will have an impact on how the speaker speaks, which is valuable, but it is fairly limited because it doesn't reflect the range that that's in an individual speaker will have in switching between colloquial and educated, more formal. So that's one limited, but it is still valuable because it does reflect the fact that educated speakers are likely to speak differently from people who are less well educated or know less English. So that's one thing. Now, you mentioned about the speaker who varied in her speech. She wasn't actually switching between varieties there. What we noticed there, she alternated between thing and ting, or three and tree. Variation is actually common in even within a single utterance without switching in varieties. So variation is the norm. And the idea that somebody would have a single way of saying a single word and always pronounce it that way is, that's probably not correct. I think we all vary in the way we speak. Now you're talking about Kenyan English, you were saying. I imagine that the variation there is very similar. You have people who are well educated who speak very educated English, and you have people with less knowledge. But I imagine you also have quite a lot of variation in speakers will speak in one way when giving a talk, when talking to me, or giving a lecture, and then will speak differently when they go home and talk to their family or talk to their friends. So I imagine that's very similar.
I'm really sorry, guys. I know you want to have a great debate about this, but if we don't stop in here, we can't start next door. So I noticed that there are 2 questions in chat. Would those 2 people email David direct? That might be a way of resolving those questions. And otherwise, I'm afraid I'm going to have to say thank you so very much, David and Alfred. And Alfred, we're so sorry that you're not actually here. You should be, but we know you couldn't get a visa. So we'll talk to you anon, and thanks so much, David, for everything. That was great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. And maybe I'm sorry I did not manage to answer the questions in the chat. Sorry, that's I didn't see those. I could have answered those. Maybe in the I have another session on Friday. I think I don't know if people can answer them, or send them to me by email. I will do my best.
Yes, I think email would be good. Listen, thank you so much, David. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye.